Before we get started today, I just want to make a quick shout out to my friends at the Shaken Not Scared podcast. This is a wonderful podcast about horror movies, which I absolutely adore and Andrew loves even more. They talk about horror movies, they have drinks that go with it, which is even more awesome, and they have a wonderful dog, which may not be as wonderful as Alfie here, but is always fun to hear about. So go check them out. I'll put a link in the description below, and you should have a listen. So I should really come up with some sort of logic to the way I watch movies, or some sort of sense of how to watch this movie or that movie, or some sort of theme or something. Maybe in October I watch horror movies, and maybe, I don't know, in November I watch movies where everyone has a beard. I don't know. I should probably come up with some sort of system to watch movies. I haven't at all, obviously, since the movie I watched for last week's, the one with Andrew, was The Graduate, and today I watched The Edge of Tomorrow. There's no logic to it. The one we're doing on Sunday is House. Again, there's really no logic to it, and I'm sure if there was any sort of logic, perhaps that would help somehow, or at the very least get people to, I don't know, it's an illogical system, and I openly accept that. But on the other hand, I just want to watch what I want to watch, and I don't want to be forced to watch this or that. I mean, of course, when certain movies come out, I want to watch those, but overall, I'm just watching what I want. So, long story short, I watched The Edge of Tomorrow. And coming into this movie, I knew a bit about it. I remember when it first came out back in 2014, there's this big kind of advertisement ploy for like Live, Die, Repeat, Live, Die, Repeat. And they actually even changed the name on the DVD to Live, Die, Repeat, which is a bit confusing to say the least. And apparently there was a lot of confusion with the trailer and how the film actually sort of went down. I think the trailer actually did a pretty good perception of what the film was. But again, it's been 7 years since I've seen the trailer, so who knows how much that has changed since then. But coming into this film, I had a little bit of not high expectations. I had expectations, I should simply say. I knew this was a film that some people I like pretty much enjoyed. I mean, they didn't love it, but they didn't hate it either. They enjoyed the film overall, and even though I was a bit hesitant, especially back in 2014, I was a bit more of a film snob than I am today. Today I'll watch pretty much anything. Back then I was pretty picky about what I would watch, but having seen so many movies, I think there's something to learn from every film. So I came in this film just kind of hoping for a good time. I wasn't exactly expecting another Risky Business or something of that effect, but I was hoping for something genuinely enjoyable. So I come in knowing the entire premise of the whole film, which is basically that at some point Tom Cruise is going to die, and then he's going to repeat the day, and that's going to happen over and over and over and over again until at some point he ends up killing whatever alien life form it is, and then a happy ever after, and that's pretty much what I assumed would happen. And we open on this montage, which is actually a really well-made montage. I think something that we don't give enough credit to about these Hollywood films, or kind of big Hollywood, these films that cost $150 million, $200 million to make. Yes, they may feel a little cheap on certain ends, in the sense that maybe it's some sort of lazy filmmaking, or sometimes the visuals can be kind of lazy or uninteresting, and the story perhaps is a bit uninspired. But something these films almost always do really well is they have incredible montages, and I think this is another case of that. I absolutely love the montage in this film. It's just a great way to kind of build who these people are, explain the story, use exposition without actually having to use exposition. It's pretty well done. It is, of course, exposition, and they're smart enough to kind of weave in the actual news reporters with your Tom Cruise and your other sort of big name actors, and it works, and it's fun. And I'm basically 2 minutes in this film, I've bought into the film. I'm like, ooh, this is going to be a really interesting and intriguing film. And this is where we're introduced to the Tom Cruise character, which coming to this movie, I thought he was a Top Gun type character. Basically, a character who's, I've also never seen Top Gun, so maybe this isn't the greatest example, but basically someone who's just this total badass. He's great in war, and he's just basically, your dream soldier, basically. And when we cut to our next scene, which is Major whatever Tom Cruise's name is, Bash, Cage, that seems to be it. When he bumps in, or when he is ordered to the office of not his commanding officer, but what comes to be his commanding officer, we learn that he is not, in fact, this, badass war hero, but is just basically this, advertising sleazeball. He's a figurehead in kind of the worst ways, and I really enjoyed that, and I think casting Tom Cruise for this role at this moment was a really smart idea, because this film is playing off of, at least at the very beginning and a bit through the whole film, it's playing off of a viewer's expectations. It seems like they knew a Tom Cruise-like character was going to be it, so as a viewer we come in thinking, oh yeah, this is a total badass, kind of shooting people, doesn't really give a shit what people think, kind of just doing what needs to be done. You're a real macho man. And when they come in with this expectation, but the reality of the film is that he's actually not that. He's the opposite. That he's kind of a weakling. He's pretty much a coward. He does everything in his power to hide from ever going into doing really anything of any value, and literally sending millions of people to war for no good reason. And it's great, because you immediately are uncomfortable with your own feelings as a viewer, because you have these expectations coming in that, oh, it's the great Tom Cruise, it's this person, it's this icon that we have built, and now you are kind of betraying it. It'd be like if we had a Tom Cruise-like character become evil. I think Dexter sort of tried to do this in the season with his son. I'm not saying Tom Cruise, I mean Tom Hanks. He did this with his son Colin Hanks, and they tried to kind of make this sort of doughy, just really all-around nice guy into this evil character. I don't think it worked as well there, but it's kind of what they're doing here, which is, let's get someone who it's basically getting your Arnold Schwarzenegger type and put him in a role you wouldn't expect him in. It's like seeing Arnold Schwarzenegger in Jingle All the Way. It's just a role you don't traditionally expect him in. Because you don't expect him in, it works in a weird way. And so our sleazeball protagonist, Tom Cruise, Major Cage, who becomes Private Cage, basically threatens. They say, I'm not going on the front lines. That's a terrible idea. I refuse to do that. And his commanding officer says, no, you're going to do it. And he's like, no, I'm not going to do it. And he tries to run away, but is arrested and wakes up on this barge ship. It's not really clear where they are exactly, but they're on some sort of military base. And he is basically turned into a private, and his entire life is flipped around. And he knows that in the next 12 hours, basically, he's going to die. He's going to be put on the front lines. And through this whole first phase, it's just him kind of fumbling around, trying to convince people that, no, he's this major, he shouldn't be here, he has no idea what he's doing. And one of my most enjoyable moments in the film is him constantly asking, hey, how do you turn off the safety on this? How do you turn off the safety? And him just trying to figure out just the most basic things that they really should have told him beforehand. And so we cut to the next day on the battlefield of Normandy or whatever beach it is, and it is just an atrocity. People are killed left and right, and Tom Cruise is just sort of fumbling his way through things. He doesn't really know what he's doing. And lo and behold, he just so happens to kill this blue mimic. Those are what the monster's called, mimics. But as he kills it, it quite literally melts his face, and he's dead. Cut to, we wake up the next day, but of course the day has started over. And much like Groundhog Day, at first he's just trying to figure out, he's like, wait a minute, and he's starting to kind of point things out, but it's pretty slow. And if I want to talk anything about before Groundhog Day begins, I think it takes a little too long to get into Groundhog Day, and I think it takes too long for him to realize it. One of the things I really enjoyed about the film Palm Springs is it recognizes, which this film sort of does, but not nearly to the same extent, that we all know the story of Groundhog Day. We've seen a million variations of it. It's kind of boring, and it's been done a million times before, and so if you're going to do it again, you have to bring something new to it, which I think, I would argue, Palm Springs very well did, and I think this sort of did too, but it takes too long to, first of all, get there, and secondly, to sort of get the ball rolling. But something that does work really well is, I think, the editing in this part of the film is also really well, on a more macro level, not as much on the micro level, but cutting between the scene to scene, or him continually trying to learn and figure things out. It's fun and enjoyable, and it's actually pretty funny, him just kind of fumbling around and trying not to be as terrible as he is. Of course, eventually him and the woman sort of meet up, and she's like, come find me the next day, and he ends up finding her, and this is when they explain basically the plot of the rest of the film, which is there's this neuro center thing that they need to kill. It's a MacGuffin, basically. It doesn't really matter to the plot, but basically they need to find it. So they spend the next 20, 30 minutes of the film basically doing different sort of training montages where he's fighting, he's getting better, he's constantly being killed because he just wakes up the next day. And again, it sort of plays into sort of how funny it is and how lighthearted death is in this film. But I think this is also one of the problems with the film, which is that what are the stakes of the film? Sure, everyone dies, but when it's all just going to be repeated, it doesn't really matter. I think something that Palm Springs did really well, and I don't know why I keep talking about this film, but I think it's important, and I think in a certain sense, perhaps the original Groundhog Day reveled in this more too, which is, if you're just going to die, if it's just going to repeat, how do you survive? How do you live through the day? The stakes aren't so much about living and dying. They're about more than just surviving. They're about, how do you continue to exist? Bill Murray, of course, famously wanted Groundhog Day to be much darker than it was, and wanted a lot more suicides than there are, which is kind of what Palm Springs is. Palm Springs, I think, in many ways, is the Groundhog Day Bill Murray wanted, which is a film that deals with death and just how awful, how heaven and hell actually don't look that different. They're actually very similar to each other, and that's what's sort of terrifying. And I think what this film perhaps struggles with is that there's no stakes to him dying. He's just going to come back to life and just start over and over. And there's this confusing thing of what happens if he makes it to the next day, which something that they never really clarify, but I think I can assume from the film is that you can live as many days as you want as long as you have the same blood. It's sort of, I don't know why they never clarify that, because he always seems to die within the day. They never really talk about, well, what if we stay, 5 days, 10 days, a week, a month? But I guess the world's taken over within 3 days anyways. He always dies within that time. I'd like at least a couple iterations where he tries to live more than 1 day, or any iterations really, except for only once, where he runs away. Because other than that one time he goes to, say, London to drink a beer, he doesn't really ever run away. You would think he would try that more than once, and I think that'd be a really interesting exploration of the film that it just isn't that interested in. So he continues to sort of fight his way with this woman who's the Angel of Verdun, as they call her. Verdun? I don't know. The Angel of whatever. She's basically just this badass woman who who's experienced the same thing that Tom Cruise is going through right now. But this is actually another question that I didn't ever understand, and I suppose it's what do you call? It's refrigerator questions, refrigerator problems, which is, I guess I had it during the film, so it isn't even that. How did she know she didn't have it anymore? And I know that, like, when later on he loses his ability, and he says, oh, I can just tell, I just know. But how did she know? Because it seems like the only way you would know if you still had her or not is if you died. But if you die and didn't wake up, then you're dead forever, so she still won't be there. So how did she figure it out? I get how Tom Cruise figures it out, because they're told that if you basically are given someone else's blood, it doesn't work anymore. But how did she know? That's never really clarified. I guess she just felt it. It was just intuition. I don't know. If it was just the same day over and over again, then of course. But it's not just the same day. It's multiple days. I think, again, that's one of the things that's never really clarified. And it's just like little things like this that don't really take up a whole lot of time, and I think could actually add a lot of value to the film, are just kind of looked over, which is strange because they'll keep in a lot of moments that I found are kind of uninteresting. And there's definitely an Aliens vibe to this film, especially between the crew that, isn't our protagonist, the only person, very similar to how in Aliens, The crew that isn't our main female protagonist is kind of just their own entity, and much like aliens, at least for me, I found them entirely uninteresting as characters, and they're all pretty much just the same person. They're just these badass military dudes or female dudes that I could care less about, and like they're, oh, this one's so unique and this one's so different. They try and make these differences between them, but they're so surface level differences. Like, oh, this one's a woman and says bitch all the time, or this one's fat, or this one's a ladies man. It's just like, it's the most lazy version of storytelling that I am just honestly not that interested in. And so I'm not interested in any of those characters. I'm more interested in Tom Cruise's interaction with these characters, and throughout the film, just him like constantly pointing out, oh no, this happens here, and just him always having to convince people that he's existing in this world, which I absolutely love. And I love the idea that he has to keep doing it over and over and over and over again, because he has to do the same thing again and again and again. And unlike perhaps, say, a Groundhog Day or a Palm Springs, there's a much more specific goal. So there's very specifically something that they're moving towards, which I do think is what makes this film unique from other Groundhog Day films, is he's basically learning. It's basically artificial intelligence. In a lot of ways, this movie is pretty much a video game where you start a game and the first few times you die almost immediately. But each time you get a little bit farther, a little bit farther, a little bit farther. Sometimes you don't get as far, but you keep getting further and farther. And every time, every new iteration, you learn new things. And for this whole, again, going back to this whole 30 minute montage of them trying to get there and planning it out and trying different things. They're like, oh, we'll do this, we'll do that, we'll keep going. And this just keeps going and going and going until we get to the farm. There's not really new iterations of this. It's just kind of repeating the same thing over and over again. And this brings me to a point that I want to talk about before we move on with the rest of the film, which is, besides the fact that the script is sort of predictable, and I don't think it's quite as funny as I think it is, although to me the funniest moments I don't think were supposed to be as funny, and sort of like the big jokes I don't think land as well, but kind of the smaller ones I thought were genuinely funny. But visually it is just really uninteresting. It seems to me that they put very little thought into the visuals of this film. It feels like a lot of just shot reverse, a lot of, just two-person, or just, just light it basically how you normally would and just put the camera here and it's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's certainly competent filmmaking, and it's a very different type of filmmaking to make these big budget films than it is, say, your small budget film like a Minari or any of these independent films. But it just sort of feels lazy, or like the whole time they're just thinking, oh, we'll just fix it in post. Like, I don't know. A lot of the time it just feels like the visuals don't have a purpose. Like, their only purpose of these visuals is to keep the story moving forward. And even though that the visuals themselves can tell their own story, and I think any great film does that. And in this film, you don't really see that happen, which is kind of, it dulls the mood and it makes it a little more boring than it needs to be. But after a while, they end up getting to the farm, and this is the first moment, really, where there's a bit of a breather, where you can kind of relax. And I think this is a sort of missed opportunity. It's sort of trying to get the two to connect, and it's trying to show Tom Cruise, or Cage, whatever, his terror of watching her die. And you have to admit, I think Tom Cruise is really giving his all here. I just don't think he's given a lot to work with, which is... It's incredibly profound that he is watching this woman die every single day. It's clear that he's falling in love with her in some sense, maybe not in a sexual sense, but a platonic sense, or some sort of relationship. And he is repeatedly watching her die over and over and over and over again. And this time he just wants it to change. He wants to do something different. But she is so stubborn that she just does the same thing, it's frustrating, because while you see character growth in him, you really don't see character growth in her. And I get that, well, technically she's being the same thing, so should there be really any character growth in her? But I would argue there should be, and I would argue at this point, this is a point to kind of slow down and stop. And while they kind of try to, they move way too quickly back into action. I think of Avengers, Infinity War, Avengers Endgame, where they are all at the farm, just a bunch of superheroes sitting around talking. Now, apparently originally in this part of the film, they were going to cut this. They were told, this is already too long. This doesn't add anything. Let's just cut it out. But the Ruffo brothers, Ruffo? Is that who did this? I don't know. There's too many brothers out there. But whatever brothers who made the Avengers Endgame and Infinity War in the opposite order, they argued that, no, we need this. We kind of need a moment to stop, to calm down, to kind of pull back, which I think was a really smart move. And I think what this film, even though it came before those films, was trying to do, but I think failed to do, because there's no character growth in our female protagonist. Through most of the film, she's just the same person. She's so stubborn, she's so focused on her own ways, and she's so quick to not believe Cage, even though she went through the exact same thing, so it doesn't really make a lot of sense that she doesn't believe it, which I guess is its own thing in and of itself. She experienced the same thing as him, so why is she so quick to question him? I get that she's, this badass who does what she wants and, never takes no for an answer, or blah, 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 but she literally went through what he went. Why doesn't she believe him? If he says something's gonna happen, okay, believe him. And in that moment, I just wanted a bit of a breather, because this film moves so quickly, because this film is just at 1,000 miles per hour the whole film. I wanted to pause, and it tries to pause here, but it does not pause nearly enough. And before you know it, she's in the helicopter trying to fly away, and she dies. Now, this is an interesting point in the film, and I would argue the most interesting point in the film, and perhaps the best part of the film. He dies, and then starts back over, and unlike all of the times before that, he's basically over it. He's tired of dying. He's tired of people watching people die. He's tired of the whole thing. And he goes blank. And he demands certain things from different people. And he just powers his way all the way through. And it's a really intriguing scene, because you see Private Cage, or Major Cage, whatever you want to call him, Tom Cruise, broken. You see him for the first time actually having to deal with the idea of death, with the trauma of death that it's sort of kind of dealing with before, but I don't think until this moment actually deals with. And he gets all the way to the facility that they're trying to get him to. He's fighting off monsters, he's shooting left and right, he's got these cool guns. It's really dark, so I'm not entirely sure what was going on in that scene, but long story short, whatever MacGuffin they're looking for, the nucleus, it's not there. When he wakes up the next day, he tells this scientist and the female protagonist this story. They're like, what? That can't be. And he's like, yeah, it's a trap to... Well, I'm not sure what the trap is exactly, because the nucleus, or alien, knows that killing him only restarts the cycle. So what exactly is their plan? Because if I was the alien, I'd be like, oh, okay, we can't kill him because I'll just start it over. But what we can do is we can capture him and just hold on to him. But they don't do that, which you think they would at least try to do. But on the other hand, this film is not interested in aliens at all, which I'm not saying this has to be a District 9 where we're only interested in the aliens and this is a big metaphor for immigration or racism or sexism or whatever. I'm not saying it has to be that. It's a fun film, but give them something. At least make them like a Thanos-like character, who isn't the most interesting character in the world, but he does have some... he has ideas, maybe not the best ideas in the world, but he does have some sort of motives, whether those motives are good or not, or logical or not. At least give them some motives, and they never give these mimics, these faceless creatures, motives, which is, honestly, it's pretty disappointing. But, nevertheless, Tom Cruise, Major Cage, whatever, comes to the conclusion that this is actually trapped, this isn't actually where it is. So they're like, how do we actually get to where we need to go? And the scientist says, well, if you stick this in your brain, or, your leg, whatever, then you can connect to some neural stream and it'll work out. Again, it's sort of another MacGuffin. It's just something to kind of get the plot moving forward. And this scene I actually enjoy a lot, which is this moving in to... it's not the White House, but it's basically the international version of the White House. It's where our Army General is. And instead of showing us the same thing over and over again, because at this point it's gotten pretty repetitive, they've been doing the same thing a lot, you're going to run out of tricks pretty quickly, so I want to give all of the love to the editors on this film to intelligently put this thing together. And instead of doing any of that, they basically run it from basically the last trial. So the whole time, Tom Cruise is just counting everything, and he's like, don't do this, don't do that, step here, step there. And it's basically doing the 20-minute montage that was earlier in one quick swoop and as one single playthrough. Again, this is very video game-esque. And this is pretty enjoyable, and I kind of wish more of the film was like this. Instead of showing him dying and having to start over, we already know that stuff's going to happen. You really don't need to show us that part of the film. Show us these moments where he's just masterfully like, oh, 10 steps here, 5 steps there, 3 steps there, you know, move this, do that. And through this montage of going through this, who knows how many times, we get to the office, he convinces this leader of whatever military force that they should indeed be given the thing, and then the woman asks, what do we do now? And he's like, I don't know, I never got this far, which is always interesting. And so he walks outside, and then they're immediately killed, which is funny, and I enjoy it. My only problem is, when he walks outside, the woman immediately pulls her gun. I get that she is a total badass, but do we have to make her so stupid? I mean, if there are 20 guns at you, pointed at you, the last thing you're gonna do is pull out your gun. Like, think it through just a little bit. I get it if, like, they walk out and they're just killed. Fine. That's fine. You can tell that story. But come on, don't make her so stupid. Like, there's just no reason to do that. So they're killed, and it's implied that they go through the whole thing again, and then they're in the car, which is, again, interesting, this idea of implying the repetitive notion that was established much earlier in the film. And this is where he stabs himself in the leg, and they figure out where the actual neurocenter is, which is under the Louvre, which is fun, I guess. But the problem is as they're trying to go away, they are stopped, and both are in a car crash. And when Tom Cruise wakes up, we realize that his blood has been replaced, which means that he no longer has the superpower or whatever. Which it really bothers me that they never explain how that works. So how would you know if you don't or don't have, or do or don't have it? Like, maybe like give them some symptoms, like they're really itchy, or they feel something different. Just give them some sort of symptoms so they can know when they don't have it, instead of just, oh, I just know that. It's just lazy writing, and it only takes 1 or 2 sentences to fix it, and the fact that you choose not to, it bothers me. It genuinely bothers me. So at this point, the film is interesting, sort of, but also less interesting. It's more interesting because your shtick, your spiel is over, and there's still another 20 minutes of the film, which is interesting. And after he wakes up, I guess there's the first time there's stakes in the film, but like I said, there's also not stakes at this point, because, well, we've all seen this movie a million times before. We know that our protagonist, we know Tom Cruise isn't going to die until the end of the film, or even if he does die, female protagonist will go on, and to be honest, they're not the most interesting of characters, so do I actually care that much? Honestly, not really. But they break out of the facility somehow, and for the first time until the beginning, he doesn't have his usual shtick, which is strange for a Groundhog Day film, because that's typically the very end of the film. That's like the last 5 minutes of the film. It's the last 10 minutes of the film, and there's still 20 more minutes of this film, which I think we should give them something like a nod to their courage to do this. I don't know if it's the right choice necessarily. I think there's a reason that they typically stick to the shtick, because that's kind of the whole film. We're here to watch a film where Tom Cruise dies a bunch of times. That's the film we're here to watch. We're not here to watch him not die. You know, if we wanted to see that, we'd go see Mission Impossible, which basically is this movie, but just better. Yeah, I think I got that right. The Mission Impossible movies are better. Well, not all of them. Some of them. The last one was. And so they're going around, they're like, okay, the nucleus, it's in the Louvre. How do we get there? Well, we need a team. So he's like, oh, okay, I'll go with the aliens people. And by aliens people, I'm talking about the crew of people that were, you know, similar to the people in Aliens. Just a group of boring people that you don't really care about. At least I don't care about at all. And he's like, well, I know this about you and that about you. And they're like, and it's, by this point, you're really bored by him having to watch people. And I get that, like, he has to do it, but don't make the viewer go through that, like, constantly trying to convince people that he's doing this. Like, the first time it's fun, first few times it's funny, but at this point it's just boring, and I don't care anymore. You just don't need to show us that scene. If you really need them, which, honestly, there's no point to him going there, because the only people that end up surviving are him and the woman anyway, so why does it matter? But they get there, it's dark, can't really see much. They're shooting a bunch of things, they're all super scared. Of course, the only people who actually even make it to the Louvre are Tom Cruise and the female protagonist, whose name I really should have learned, and have seen in a ton of other stuff before, but don't know her name, which is, I guess, I mean, it's not sexist. It's not great. So they basically take this plane, which is it's fun, very Tenet-esque, although probably didn't use a real plane as they do in Tenet, and they take this plane into the Louvre, and they're fighting off these monsters, and I'm gonna be honest, by this point I've kind of checked out, so I don't know, they shoot a couple of monsters, they have their little moment, which is like, oh, I don't want you to die, but I don't want you to die. It's fine. And then Tom Cruise jumps into the water. He jumps into the water, and somehow he's able to swim faster than the mimics, which is absurd. He is caught at the last second, but as he is caught, he drops the bombs into the nucleus and it explodes. And then Tom Cruise wakes up. And I'm a bit confused at this point. How does that work? So I spend the last of the film being confused because he wakes up, he's in his major uniform again, and he is about to meet with the leader of the military that he met with at the beginning of the film, basically suggesting that they've moved back 2 days now instead of a day back. But the thing is destroyed, and so basically everyone who died is no longer dead. Again, no stakes. I don't understand why it goes back to there. I mean, like, from an Ex Machina standpoint, I do, because it's like, oh, he's meeting her again for the first time. I don't understand in the logic of the movie why that happens, or why they go back in time at all if it's dead. And if it is dead, does that mean Tom Cruise has, cause when he killed, like, the blue thing, he basically gained their powers? I'm not sure it's because it melts on his skin or what have you. But if that's also true with the central nucleus, does that mean Tom Cruise can just do this forever? I don't know. The end of the movie is just oddly confusing, and it's not like one of those films where, oh, if you really think about it, this is what this means, you know. So I'm like, where I know people give Tenet a lot of crap, but I think it's a genuinely well thought out film, and there's a lot to think about in that film. There's not really much. I think the screenwriters just didn't really think about it, if we're being completely honest, and it just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So overall, I'm going to give this film a 5 out of 10. I don't think it's a bad film. I just don't think it's a good film either. I think it was fun. I think it's fine for what it is. I just think it's visually uninteresting. The sound is forgettable. The story is forgettable. Pretty much everyone is forgettable. To be honest, a week from now, if you ask me what this film is about, I would genuinely not be able to tell you if I had actually seen it or not. Which is just, it's fine. You know, most movies people forget about, and it's just one of those movies that was like created to make money, and 5 years from now, will people talk about this film? Probably not. It'll probably be lost in the ether of hundreds of thousands of films that are made and no one ever talks about. Which isn't bad, it just is what it is. That's just where we are in the world of filmmaking. So, I don't know. It's fine, I guess. So, until next time.